All right, so today we're diving deep into the world of gene editing with a company called Editas Medicine. Their ticker symbol is EDIT, and they're really on the cutting edge of using CRISPR technology to potentially, like, revolutionize how we treat some serious diseases.
Yeah, this is one of those companies where you got to think long term. Huge potential upside, but also a lot of risk, which is why we're taking a value investors approach to really understand them.
Exactly, and we've got a ton of info to go through, a full stock research report, company announcements, market data, the whole 9 yards. We want to break down their business, their leadership, their financials, what the market thinks, who owns the company, and of course, what risks are on the table.
All with the goal of giving you the clearest picture possible of where Editas Medicine stands right now and what their chances are, looking ahead.
Let's start with the basics.
Huh.
Their business. What do they actually do?
So Editas Medicine is a clinical stage biotech company. Basically, they're using CRISPR gene editing, which allows them to make incredibly precise changes to DNA, and they're developing treatments for some really complex diseases.
And their main focus right now is in vivo gene editing.
Huh, you got it. That means they're actually editing genes directly inside the patient's body, potentially much less invasive than other methods. And they're not just using one type of CRISPR, they're using both Cas9 and Cas12a.
Okay, ELI5, what's the difference?
Imagine you have two different but super sharp scalpels for surgery. They both cut, but each one might be better suited for a specific type of incision. Same idea here. They're both precise gene editing tools, but each has its own strengths depending on the target.
Makes sense. Now, their products and services, that's where things get really interesting because there's been a big shift lately.
You're talking about the discontinuation of ReniCell. That's also known as EDAT 301. It was their big program targeting sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. They pulled the plug back in December 2024, which was a huge strategic move.
Definitely a change in direction. So what are they focused on now?
They're going all in on their other in vivo gene editing programs. One is still targeting blood-forming cells. Those are called hematopoietic stem cells for sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. Another program is focused on liver cells, but they haven't said yet exactly what disease they're going after there. And they're even exploring ways to deliver gene editing tools to other types of cells throughout the body.
Right, and they still have ED101 in the mix, which is for Leber congenital amaurosis type 10, an inherited eye disease that causes blindness.
Yeah, EDIT 101 is still in their pipeline, alongside some collaborations they have going on in cell therapy. But their primary energy is definitely focused on those in vivo programs now.
So with a company like this, still heavily in research and development, how do they actually make money?
Their revenue streams are pretty typical for a company at this stage. It's mostly from collaboration agreements with other biotech or pharma companies, also from their ongoing research and development activities. And a key part is sublicensing their foundational CRISPR intellectual property. Like in October 2024, they actually monetized some Cas9 license payments from Vertex Pharmaceuticals, which was a smart move to bring in some cash.
Okay, so let's zoom out and look at their overall position in the market, because there has been a pretty big dip in their stock price. What's the story there?
As of April 2025, their market cap was just around $85.46 million USD. It puts them way down on the global rankings. And yeah, their stock performance has been pretty rough across the board. They also recently announced a major workforce reduction, something like 65%, all part of this strategic shift to focus on the in vivo pipeline.
Wow, 65% is huge. So taking all of that into account, what's the core value proposition of Editas Medicine right now? What are they ultimately trying to do?
It all boils down to developing transformative, long-lasting genomic medicines. And they're doing this using CRISPR in vivo gene editing, really aiming to find solutions for those diseases with huge unmet medical needs. And I think the appeal of the in vivo approach is that it's modifying genes right inside the body. Compared to ex vivo, where they take cells out, modify them, and then put them back in, it has the potential to be much less invasive.
Now, let's be honest. The discontinuation of ReniCell and those layoffs, they're pretty big red flags. What should a value investor take away from that?
It definitely raises questions, like how confident were they in ReniCell's commercial viability, especially when you look at other approved therapies for those same conditions, like Casgevy and Lyfgenia. The fact that they couldn't find a commercial partner probably played a big role in that decision. Maybe partners had concerns about its effectiveness, safety, or just its ability to compete in the market. And then those big layoffs, that just shows how much that setback hit them financially.
But they do seem to be really banking on the potential of this in vivo pipeline.
Oh, absolutely. They're putting a lot of emphasis on that. They're pointing to recent preclinical data, the potential for less invasive treatments. It seems like all their big plans for 2025 revolve around pushing that in vivo pipeline forward.
And that drop in market cap, the negative stock performance, that's basically the market saying, we're not so sure about this, right?
Yeah, I think the market is reacting to all the uncertainty, the discontinuation, the layoffs, the shift in strategy. It's just not clear yet whether these in vivo programs are going to pan out.
Makes sense. So let's move on to management. Who are the key players at Editas?
So at the helm, you've got Gilmore O'Neill, the president and CEO. He's got over 20 years of experience in genetic medicine, neurobiology, clinical development, and importantly, he's been successful in getting clinical programs all the way through to marketing approval. The CFO is Amy Parison. She was appointed just in March 2025, but she brings over 18 years of financial experience, specifically in the life sciences industry. And then there's Linda C. Berkeley. She's the Executive VP and Chief Scientific Officer. She's been with Editas since July 2023 and has over 35 years of experience in biotech R&D. And, it's worth noting those recent changes in leadership, particularly the CFO transition, it's something to keep an eye on.
Always good to see how management responds to tough times.
Yeah.
How has Editas handled challenges in the past?
Well, the Rennie situation and the layoffs. That's a prime example of how they respond to a setback. They pivoted hard towards their in vivo pipeline. They also renegotiated a collaboration they had with Allergan for an eye disease program and actually ended up regaining full rights to those programs. That shows they can be proactive. And they managed to work through a partial clinical hold on the RUBY trial for EDIT 301. So they've proven they can navigate regulatory hurdles.
How about their communication through all of this? Have they been transparent?
Mostly through standard channels like press releases, SEC filings. But one thing that's changed is they stopped doing quarterly financial results conference calls. Some investors might see that as less transparency, less opportunity to talk directly to management, but they have been emphasizing their commitment to being open with patient communities, which is super important in this field.
And speaking of important, gene editing comes with some ethical baggage. What's their stance on that?
They do have a formal code of business conduct and ethics. It basically sets the standard for legal and ethical behavior for their employees. Integrity and compliance are key. And they do acknowledge the broader ethical and societal implications of gene editing. They're not shying away from that conversation.
Going back to Rennie, could that decision to stop it suggest that they messed up their initial strategy?
It's possible. I mean, killing a major program like that after investing so much and going through clinical trials, it does raise questions about their initial assessment and strategy. Maybe the shift to in vivo will turn out to be the right move long term, but it does make you think about their decision-making process.
In ditching those conference calls, that can't be good for investor confidence, right?
It's definitely a risk. Sure, they're still releasing financial info, but those calls were a chance for investors and analysts to really grill management, ask specific questions, dig deep into their performance and plans. Taking that away, especially when there's so much change and uncertainty, it could easily make investors nervous.
All right, time to talk money. Where's Editas putting their capital right now?
No surprise here, it's all about that in vivo pipeline. Their R&D expenses went way up in 2024. It hit $199.2 million, and a lot of that was specifically for in vivo research. They're saying they'll announce 2 new in vivo development candidates by mid-2025, one for blood stem cells, the other for something liver-related.
Any mergers, acquisitions, share buybacks, dividends on the horizon?
Nothing about mergers or acquisitions in the research. Seems like their focus is on internal realignment. No history of share buybacks either.
Right.
And typical for a company like this that's not yet profitable, no dividends, and they don't expect any anytime soon, it all goes back into R&D.
Now for the fun part, return on invested capital. And the numbers you mentioned earlier, not pretty.
Yeah, their reported ROIC for late 2024 was consistently negative. Some sources say as bad as negative 137.73% for Q4 2024. Annualized for the whole year, negative 164.70%. Others show similar negative figures. It's definitely a red flag for value investors. It means they're not generating a positive return on the capital they have. They're actually destroying value instead of creating it. And that kind of trend can't go on forever. To be a good investment from a value perspective, they need a clear path to positive returns. And right now, that all depends on those in vivo programs. It's a very high-risk, high-reward scenario.
I do find it interesting, though, that they were already ramping up their in vivo investments even before they dropped reni-cel. It's like they saw the writing on the wall.
It does suggest they were being proactive. Maybe they had doubts about reni-cel's potential even before things went south. They were already putting resources into in vivo, which could be a sign that they're good at planning ahead and recognizing the potential benefits of this approach.
But still, that negative ROIC, you can't just ignore that.
Definitely not. It's a super important metric for understanding how well a company uses its capital. And if it's consistently negative, it raises big questions about whether their business model is sustainable long term. Can they actually make money for their investors? Value investors are all about profits, and right now, it doesn't look good.
And no dividends, while normal for a company at this stage, also reflects their current financial situation, right?
Exactly. R&D-heavy biotechs typically reinvest any earnings back into the business to keep development going. And their current performance, negative profitability, negative cash flow, it all supports their decision not to pay dividends. Investors are betting on potential future revenue from those drugs in the pipeline, not current payouts. They do have cash runway into Q2 2027, but clinical trials are expensive. They'll probably need more funding before they can commercialize anything, which means market sentiment and investor confidence are crucial. You know, it's amazing how much information is out there on companies like Editas Medicine, but trying to piece it all together, make sense of it, it can be a real headache. What if you could get this level of in-depth analysis on any stock at any time? And what if you could customize it to your level of knowledge and how deep you want to dive into each topic? Podcast host mid-roll ad break. Well, that's what we're building at stockanalytics.ai. We're creating a platform that lets you generate custom reports, podcasts, even videos on any stock. Plus, we're adding an interactive interface where you can ask questions, a voice-controlled stock screener, and a portfolio analyzer that helps you de-risk and stress test your investments. Podcast host mid-roll ad break. Visit stockanalytics.ai today and check out our demo. We've also opened up a waiting list for beta users with 50% discounts and even opportunities to invest in the future of financial intelligence. Podcast host mid-roll ad break. Sign up now at stockanalytics.ai. Podcast host mid-roll ad break. And now, back to our deep dive into Editas Medicine.
Okay, we're back. Let's get into market sentiment. What's the overall vibe around this stock right now?
Mostly negative, which makes sense given that stock price decline. There might have been some temporary bumps when they released good preclinical data, but overall, the mood after reni-cel got axed and those financials came out, it's not great.
What are the analysts saying? Any consensus?
It's all over the place, honestly. The consensus rating is hold, which basically means they're not sure, and the price targets they're giving are all over the map, from super bullish to very bearish. It's just a lot of uncertainty.
We also saw some info about short interest, and it's pretty high. What does that tell us?
High short interest means a lot of investors are betting that the stock price is going to drop even further. It just reinforces that negative sentiment we're seeing.
So it sounds like investors are basically worried about this whole strategic shift, the reni-cel failure, and the big question mark hanging over those in vivo programs.
Yeah, that's a good summary. The market is spooked, and for understandable reasons. They're not convinced that this new direction is the right one, and early-stage drug development is inherently risky. There are just too many unknowns right now.
And those mixed analyst ratings, that just shows how unpredictable this whole thing is, especially with a company changing direction like this.
Absolutely. Analysts are trying to balance the potential of their in vivo tech against all the risks. It's a tough call.
Yep.
Ultimately, the market's going to judge them based on how those in vivo programs perform in clinical trials. That's the make or break moment.
Okay, let's move on to ownership. Who actually owns Editas Medicine?
The majority is held by institutions. They own about 62.68% of the shares. But we've seen reports that some of them have been selling recently, which isn't a great sign. Insider ownership, meaning the shares held by management and directors, is pretty low, only 0.43%. And there's been some insider selling lately, too.
So even though institutional ownership is usually seen as a good thing, if they're selling and insiders are selling too, that could be a cause for concern.
Yeah, it's not ideal. Usually, institutional investors do a lot of research before they buy a stock, so if they're getting out, it might mean they're not so confident anymore. And when insiders sell, it can make regular investors nervous. Like, do they know something we don't?
All right, let's do a risk assessment. Time for a SWOT analysis. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Starting with strengths, what's going well for Editas?
They've got a few things going for them. They're pioneers in gene editing. They've got a strong brand. They have a ton of expertise in both Cas9 and Cas12a CRISPR technology. Their platform supports both in vivo and ex vivo approaches, so they've got options. They're focusing on a unique in vivo gene upregulation strategy, which could be a big deal if it works. They've got enough cash to last into Q2 2027, and they have a solid portfolio of patents protecting their technology.
There's a decent list of strengths. But what about weaknesses? Where are they vulnerable?
They've got their fair share of those too. The Rini cell discontinuation was a huge blow to their pipeline. They're not profitable, they're losing money, their cash flow is negative, their revenue dropped significantly in 2024. Market sentiment is bad, analysts are unsure, they've stopped doing those quarterly conference calls, which makes them look less transparent. Insider ownership is low, and insiders are selling. And of course, their return on invested capital is consistently negative. It's not a pretty picture.
It's a long list. Now for the more optimistic stuff, what opportunities are out there for them?
Well, the gene editing market is expected to grow a lot in the next few years, so there's huge potential there if they can get a successful therapy to market. That in vivo gene upregulation strategy could be a game changer. CRISPR technology is constantly improving, so there's always the possibility of new breakthroughs. They could partner with other companies, and the regulatory environment for gene editing is actually becoming more favorable in some areas, so there's definitely hope.
And finally, the threats. What are the biggest dangers they need to be prepared for?
Competition is fierce in the gene editing space. The regulations are complex and constantly changing. There are still a lot of public and ethical concerns about gene editing. Clinical trials are unpredictable. There's always a chance they could fail or get delayed. They'll probably need more money at some point, and raising capital is going to be tough with the market feeling the way it does right now.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. It's time to wrap things up and try to synthesize all this information. What are the main takeaways from this deep dive?
Editas Medicine is at a crossroads right now. They had to make a big strategic shift after Rini cell failed, and they're betting everything on their in vivo pipeline. They're facing a lot of challenges, negative market sentiment, financial losses. But they're also in a field with huge growth potential. They have cutting-edge technology, they've got cash to keep them going for a while. Their future really depends on how those in vivo programs perform, whether they can compete effectively, and how well they can navigate the regulatory maze. It's a make-or-break moment for them.
And it's important to remember that this is just a snapshot in time. Gene editing is a rapidly evolving field. Things change all the time.
Absolutely. The science, the regulations, the competitive landscape, it's constantly in flux.
So, to leave you with something to think about, our end hook for today. Given the high-risk, high-reward nature of gene editing and Editas Medicine's big strategic bet, what single piece of news about their in vivo pipeline in the next year do you think would have the biggest impact on how the market views their long-term potential?
That's a great question for investors to consider.
If you enjoyed this deep dive and want to explore more companies like Editas Medicine with us, be sure to subscribe to the Stock Analytics AI YouTube channel.
We release new videos all the time covering all kinds of fascinating companies and technologies.
And one last thing, a quick disclaimer. This discussion is for informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research and talk to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions. This deep dive into Editas Medicine was brought to you by Research and AI. Thanks for listening.